Rain had rinsed the highway clean by dawn, leaving the town of Red Bluff smelling like wet cedar and diesel. Marisol Quintero rolled her tired shoulders as the neon open sign flickered to life above the diner windows. She hadn't slept much. The road had a way of keeping you honest, but the promise of black coffee and eggs could stitch a morning together. She pushed through the glass door with her gloved hand, a quiet bell announcing a stranger in a jacket too plain for the patches she carried in her heart. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow I have a special story for you. The air inside tasted like bacon salt and old stories. A jukebox in the corner wore a coat of dust the color of ancient pennies, and the red vinyl booths creaked in a language of 1,000 breakfasts. There were men at the counter already, stocky, sunburnt necks, caps from feed stores and a pipeline company. On the far end, 3 younger ones with shaved heads and matching iron-on patches whose designs tried hard to be meaner than their eyes. A waitress in white sneakers and a blue apron slid plates down a line like dealing cards. Marisol Quintero took a booth near the window where she could watch her bike, a black twin she called Santa Muerte for the silver charm that swung from the throttle. "Coffee?" the waitress asked. She had a tired, kind face. Her name tag said Lynn, but the loop in the Y was almost gone. "Yes, ma'am." Marisol unlaced her gloves. The diner heat crawled into her fingers like relief. She felt the road in her bones, the invisible sway of wind across the Mojave still lodged behind her eyes, even though the desert was a state away. She was 31 and had learned to wear silence like a vest, sometimes plaited, sometimes soft. The coffee arrived in a thick mug with a hairline crack near the lip, sugar in a glass shaker, cream that tasted of the walk-in fridge. It wasn't the good kind, but it was the honest kind. She took a breath that tasted like yesterday's grease and thought of her father, who fried eggs in a tiny kitchen in Nogales and swore the secret to mornings was to know exactly how much salt a person could take. The men at the counter swiveled on their stools by degrees, a little choreography they probably thought was subtle. One of the shaved-head boys caught sight of Marisol and whispered to the one beside him, who was already watching her reflection in the chrome napkin holder. The patch on their jeans vests wasn't an outlaw club, more the mail-order kind, snarling wolf, American flag the size of a wallet glued to it, a Latin phrase no one there could translate if asked. Lynn set a menu down with a clatter she didn't mean. "The kitchen's a little slow this morning. Storm knocked out a freezer last night. You're welcome to sit as long as you like." "Take your time," Marisol smiled so the woman could breathe. "I'm not going anywhere quick." That was almost true. She had business north of Red Bluff, a meeting that required her to arrive neither early nor late. She thought of the envelope zipped into the inner pocket of her jacket, the paper with 2 names and a number scrawled in block letters. She thought of the quiet, coded call she'd made at a truck stop payphone, the scent of bleach and stale cigarettes, and the old woman who said, "Mija, this is a long road. You sure?" The bell over the door jangled again. This time it sounded like a verdict. 4 more came in. Same shaved heads, same amateur patches, one with a hoodie that declared a club name like a dare. They were too loud to belong to morning. The countermen, the ones with pipeline caps, shrunk into their coffee. A boy in a baseball jacket at a back table lowered his eyes to his pancakes as if he'd been taught somewhere between homework and sleep that this was how you survived certain weather. The tallest of the new arrivals scanned the room, saw Marisol, and almost smiled in that slow, "I found a thing" way predators sometimes do. She swallowed once, drying her palms on her jeans. She could smell the wet wool of their hoodies, the dog breath of cheap whiskey from last night. The jukebox spat out a country song about a girl and a truck and a man who didn't deserve either. Outside, her bike leaned into a gust and straightened again, as if in agreement. "Looks like tourist season started early," the tall one said, loud enough for the room. "Mornin', sweetheart. That your rice burner out there?" Marisol took a breath, let it out. "It's American metal, but the road doesn't care." "You hear that?" he nudged his friend. The road doesn't care. He tapped the counter twice, a private code, and the others around him lined their bodies into a half-arc that made the waiter step 3 inches backward and the cook's spatula stop midair. Lynn lifted a coffee pot like a priest lifts a book. You boys want a table, I'll seat you. You boys want trouble, I'll call Sheriff Harlan and he'll seat you in county. The tall one winked at her. I got a reservation at the counter, darling. He slid onto the nearest stool and chose a view where he could look at Marisol without turning his head. Place got new rules since I last ate here?
Same rules, Lynn said, her voice all knuckles now. People eat, people treat people like people. That's the only rule that matters. The boy at the back table tried to smile at that, then thought better of it. The baseball jacket hung on him like he'd grown too fast for it to keep up. The tall one turned his attention back to Marisol. Where you from, little lady? She felt the questions slide over her skin like a blade. There are questions that ask for a story and questions that ask for permission to bruise you. South, she said, same as you. Funny, he said. You don't sound like us. He let the words hang and then, soft, ain't no harm done if you finish your coffee on the sidewalk. We like to keep this place traditional. He glanced at the others, and the word traditional rolled around their mouths like a new chew. Lynn's hand trembled around the coffee pot. Everyone eats, she repeated. Everyone's welcome. Everyone local, the tall one said. Everyone ours. It didn't happen all at once. It never does. It was the way the countermen folded their arms, like they wanted to be furniture. The way the cook turned the heat down under the eggs as if hoping the room would cool with them. It was the slow tilt of 4 shaved heads and the too casual slide of the tall one's boot heel off the rung to plant on the linoleum like a claim. Marisol's heartbeat went steady, not fast. When she reached for her mug, her hand didn't shake. She had been in rooms like this before, in counties where the law came 10 minutes late if it came at all. She'd learned how to read the temperature of men who wanted to teach the world its place. She'd learned the difference between a test and an invitation to a war. Finished your coffee? The tall one asked. Sun's out, sidewalk's nice. Lynn opened her mouth to answer for Marisol, and then closed it because she could see in the set of the woman's shoulders that the answer was not hers to give. Marisol lifted the mug to her lips and found humor in the burns. It reminded her of home, of mornings where heat was the point, where you got to choose the pain that made you strong. She set the mug down. I'll finish it right here. The tall one's eyes cooled. I ain't repeating myself. His friends snorted soft, performing laughter they thought sounded like power. He leaned back enough for the hoodie to ride up and for Marisol to see the handle of something tucked into his waistband, cheap polymer, a thing bought with bravado more than earnings. Her left palm tingled. The skin there remembered the texture of rubber grips, the tiny grooves worn by her thumb where the throttle liked to live. Santa Muerte waited outside, a faithful dog. Rain beating on the tank like rosary tears. In the inside pocket of Marisol's jacket, the envelope pressed against her ribs as if asking her to choose. You heard him, another of the boys said. He had a jaw like a tackle box and a tattoo that wanted to be a swastika bad enough to grow from a Sharpie. This ain't a place for... He didn't finish the sentence because the room, hearing where it was going, flinched as one organism. Marisol could feel her voice in her throat like a humming wire. She could feel her mother's kitchen, limes halved, salt in a blue bowl, radio preaching love songs and soccer scores. She could feel her father's hands on the carburetor of a truck they'd never owned, showing her how to listen for honesty in the rattle of a machine. She could feel the heat that made eggs good and the heat that made men ugly. Eat your breakfast, she said, and found the smile that had saved her life 3 times. She felt the tremor in the room before anyone moved. It was the way Lin's eyes shone with something between fear and gratitude. It was the way the boy in the baseball jacket lifted his fork again as if he had been given permission to be hungry. It was the way the tall one's hand tightened on the counter edge like he had forgotten that wood could fight back. See, I was trying to be polite, but maybe you need something you can understand. He took his time standing, scraped his boot heel just so, and the others peeled themselves from stools and booths and slid toward him like iron filings to a magnet. Marisol's heartbeat went steady, not fast. She counted 3 exits and liked none of them. Front door with a bell like a snitch, a narrow hallway toward the restrooms that probably hit a staff door, and the back kitchen door where grease collected in patterns that made running an act of faith. She thought of Santa Muerte, of the pouch tucked under the seat that held her license, her registration, and the patch folded in half that she didn't wear on civilian errands, because not every room needed to know. The patch was old, not the kind you buy. The embroidery was imperfect in the ways humans behave when they make something for another human. The skull in the center wore a grin that was less mockery than recognition. We ride for those who can't. The letters that arced over it were famous in certain circles and misunderstood in others. She had earned that right to the black and white, the way you earn a scar.
Lin moved first. She didn't plead, didn't cry. She put the coffee pot down and squared her body like the hill country woman she had been before children, and a husband who left, and a diner that got her through both. "No one tells my customers to leave," she said. "Not for what they look like, not for what you think they are." The tall one smiled at her gently, the way you smile at an old dog that's starting to forget the yard lines. "Ma'am," he said, mock chivalry, and then he looked at Marisol and forgot every bit of pretense he had practiced in mirrors. "Out." Marisol stood. She felt the seam of her jeans bite into her ankle where her boot pulled tight. She felt every weathered place on her skin and knew each had a story, and none needed to be explained. She reached for her jacket deliberately, and as she slipped it on, let the zipper stop at the collarbone so the inside pocket sat where she needed it to. She stepped into the aisle, not toward the door, but toward the counter, and the men parted for her on reflex because bodies know something about courage that minds forget. At the counter, she set a 20 under her half-finished coffee and looked at Lin. "Thank you," she said, "for the coffee. For the rule." "Don't you go anywhere," Lin said, which was almost funny given the setting. The tall one put a hand on Marisol as she passed and discovered not all shoulders want a hand. Her body turned without asking permission, weight over the right foot, hips following, palm on his wrist, thumb into the soft between bones. A quarter step in his hand was a question, and she was not answering today. He hissed, and she let him take his hand back intact because she was still being merciful. "You're gonna regret that," he said, but it sounded like he regretted it already. "Maybe," she said, "but not today." She walked toward the door with their eyes at her back, the bell's little mouth opening for a scream. Outside, the light hurt with honesty. Santa Muerte's tank had collected a lacework of raindrops. When the wind moved, they ran together and down in a geography that made her homesick for a place that was a road and not a house. She swung a leg over, thumbed the switch, and the engine answered like a friend who keeps your secrets. She let it idle and felt the shake travel up her spine into the place where fear sometimes sits. It was morning, and she had a delivery to make, and a club that did not press but would not ignore. She was not wearing the patch. She was wearing its weight. The bell jangled again behind her. The men spilled out and fanned themselves across the sidewalk like a rumor. The tall one stood in the middle, chin high, hoodie hoisting its cheap courage. He looked like a man who had impressed mirrors and was ready for the harder test of glass that looks back from other eyes. "This ain't your place," he said. "We'll make it clear for you." Marisol rolled her wrist a whisper, felt the engine nudge. "It's a diner. It's everyone's." "Not today," he said, and stepped down so his boots scratched gravel.
The other boys followed, making the kind of circle they teach at bad bonfires. A pickup idled at the curb with a Confederate flag sticker curling on the bumper, like it too wanted to leave this scene, but didn't know how to save face. "Leave," the tall one said. "Now." He made the words soft like a pillow with a rock in it. Marisol glanced at the windows. Inside, Lynn stood with her hands flat on the counter like she could hold the whole building steady by will. The boy in the baseball jacket had turned in his seat to see, his face pale in a way that stole years from him. "I'm going," Marisol said. "North. Business." She kept her voice level. She kept it human. "Not on that," the tall one said, nodding at Santa Muerte. "Not while I'm watching." His friends laughed, and the sound was coins being counted by people who had never earned them. Marisol's fingers, the good, blunt kind her father had given her, strong for wrenches and holding, flirted with the thought of the inner pocket, the envelope, the patch folded like a prayer. She felt the machine between her knees like a teacher. "I don't want trouble," she said. She meant it. She always meant it. Trouble came like weather, forecastable, but not obeying. "Funny," the tall one said, and the gun made its first appearance like a rabbit out of a hat. It wasn't pointed, not yet. It was the hint of a shape, an idea of harm. The sidewalk got very quiet. Somewhere close, a dog announced its opinion about thunder. Marisol did not look at the gun. Men like him wanted you to look, to baptize their intention. She looked at his face, at the way his eyes jittered like flies on hot glass, at the place just above the eyebrow where he would scar if he took a header off a bike at 25 miles an hour. She saw the boys around him, their mouths waiting to be told what to do, how to be men, and felt something like sadness hit her sternum like a hand.
The envelope in her pocket was suddenly heavier than the morning. She could hear the voice from the payphone again. The old woman in the fluorescent light, nursing a milk crate of cigarettes. "Mija, careful. Words are tinder." Marisol killed the engine slowly, making a point of not flinching at the silence that followed. The motorcycle ticked as it cooled, a metallic heartbeat that refused to match the room's. She dismounted, stood, and into that small motion she poured every calm minute she had ever earned. She unzipped her jacket. The boys took in breath because they had seen movies and thought they knew what was coming. What came was a rectangle of cloth, black, white, a skull with a grin worn thin by road and rain. Letters arced like a bridge she had crossed and crossed again. Outlaws MC. The bottom rocker named a state that had taught her roads that bent like questions. There were smaller patches too, square and plain, the kind that are not spoken about in places where the wrong ears might be listening. Marisol held the patch by its top edge with 2 fingers, and the past came to stand next to her like a friend who has your back so completely you forget you have one. She didn't put it on. You didn't put it on like a costume. You wore it or you didn't. Today, she held it like truth. The boys' laughter got weird at the edges. The tall one's gun did not come higher, but his knuckles whitened around the idea of it. Mirrors don't talk back, she thought. Glass does. "You're bluffing," he said, and made it a question. "Maybe," she said. "Coffee was good. You should try it inside." The pickup on the curb revved, an anxious animal. A second car turned onto Main Street and slowed because theater likes an audience. Inside, Lynn moved her lips. Later, Marisol would find out the words were "please don't, please don't, please don't." But right then it just looked like rain forming at the seam of the sky. One of the boys behind the tall one spoke without being told. "My cousin said he saw one of them in Amarillo once," he said. "Said they ride like ghosts. Said they don't stop." "Your cousin talks," the tall one snapped, and the boy was grateful to be corrected because it meant the world still had rules he understood. Marisol felt time slow into slices thin enough to count.
She could leave. She could mount up, twist, and be that small, loud memory that makes men tell stories to each other like prayers. We ran her off. She could also stay and let the thing that had carried her through storms do what it was built to do. Be named aloud, be acknowledged, be the difference between theater and consequence. She folded the patch once and slid it back into the pocket near her heart. When she zipped the jacket this time, she set her chin in a line that had gotten her home more times than any map. This isn't your stage, and I'm not your show. Then you ain't my problem, the tall one said, but the words had less muscle now. Go on then, walk. She took one step, then another, toward the street, as if she were simply a woman crossing a small-town morning. The boys shifted to let her pass because the part of them that had survived childhood recognized the part in her that had survived worse. She could feel their breath on her back, a heat like memory. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and she knew before she looked who it was. The screen showed one word, the kind of word men write when a lot of other words would be too new. Church? It meant a meet. It meant a vote. It meant not later, now. She thumbed back 2 letters. On. The pickup at the curb clicked off its engine with a nervous little cough. The flag on the bumper felt embarrassed, like it had meant to be a different sticker when it left the factory. A door opened across the street, and an old man with a milk crate of bread paused, saw the scene, and backed into shadow, like he could reverse whole years.
The tall one reached out just enough for his hand to cast a shadow on her jacket. He liked shadows. He mistook them for shelter. "We ain't done," he said. "Come sundown, we'll remember you." "Good," she said without looking back. "Remembering is how people get better." She swung back onto Santa Muerte, and the bike came alive under her like a heartbeat she could ride. She rolled the throttle, and the sound shook the morning until the boys flinched, because sound is older than courage. She pulled into the street with her back straight, her eyes set to the northern line, where the road unspooled like a story that refuses to end badly because it isn't done yet. She didn't look in the mirrors. She didn't have to. The town slid by, a hardware store with flags that weren't sure what they meant anymore. A barber shop where the window ghosted the image of a man who had been cutting hair since the 80s. A church with a marquee that promised forgiveness to those who already wanted it. Out past the last stoplight, the world widened, and the sky stopped being a ceiling and started being a place to aim. She hit 60, then 65, the bike smoothing like a man calming after a confession. The envelope at her ribs shifted with the wind, and she thought of the room up north where 12 men and 3 women would sit with their feet planted and listen. She thought of the vote, of the way a patch in that room meant something very different than it meant to the boys back at the diner. Meant duty more than menace, meant family, meant that when you called, someone came. 10 miles out, the highway shouldered to a pull-off that pretended to be a scenic view. It offered a river like a belt and trees that had chosen a hard life for themselves along its edge. She stopped because the phone buzzed again and because her hands liked the ritual of breaking a ride into chapters. A new message. Where? She sent a pin, and the river watched without comment. The sky went from nickel to tin. A semi thundered past, the driver's hat a perfect square of shade. She breathed, and the breath had new parts in it. Relief, something like sorrow, a thread of anger braided in with the old rope of her patience. She checked the mirror again and saw what she had been waiting to see before she allowed herself to feel any of it. 3 dots shimmering way back on the straight line of the highway, growing, resolving into headlights that moved like a thought shared among equals. She knew the sound before the wind carried it to her, low, tuned for distance,
not the spray can rasp of bad pipes. They came 2 by 2, then 3, then a lone straggler with a bandana that had seen Nevada sun and Minnesota rain, black in chrome and white bones grinning from tanks. As they drew near, she saw faces, old and new, brown and pale, eyes creased with road, hands that understood how to keep a machine honest. The lead rider lifted his chin, the smallest halo of respect in a language that works better at 60 than at 0. "Mornin', Quintero," he said when helmets came off and breath re-entered their bodies with the sky. He was called Ledger because he remembered everything and balanced accounts even when it cost him sleep. "Morning," she said, and took the envelope from her jacket. Church called. Ledger tapped the corner of the envelope against his palm like a man counting blessings. "We got a piece of trouble down in Crooked Pine. Same trouble, new shoes. Thought we'd take the scenic route." Marisol nodded, though her throat was sand. "Red Bluff's diner has a sign that isn't on the door," she said quietly. Ledger's mouth went a line. He wasn't from here, but he knew the sign. He had seen it in other counties, other years. Black and chrome and white bones grinning from tanks. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "No," she said. "Not me." She thought of Lynn's hands flat on the counter. She thought of the boy's pale face. But there are people inside who will be measuring themselves by what happens next. Ledger nodded slow. He looked downriver as if the answer could be found where water bothered stone into smoothness. He said, "We got a thing needs doing first. Then maybe we eat eggs." "Together," she said.
Together, he agreed. They rode. The world reduced itself to useful pieces: wind, engine, line. It felt like a prayer said correctly. The towns blurred, and the thoughts with them, leaving only the clean ones to keep. Loyalty, duty, the smell of rain on a county that didn't know what to do with it. Crooked Pine appeared like an apology. 2 gas stations, 1 school, a pawn shop that sold dignity and bought hunger. They took the back lot of a faded motel with a sign that promised HBO and ice. In a ground-floor room, the curtains had been pinned back by people who didn't trust light, and a woman with hair the color of sawdust lifted her head when the boots hit the hallway. She didn't smile until she saw the patch in Ledger's hand, and then she smiled like she had found a key in her pocket she thought she'd lost. "Name's Darlene," she said. "My boy got himself owed by the wrong man." "Which wrong man?" Ledger asked, because categories matter when the law is a map you can't rely on. "Judge Monroe's cousin," Darlene said. "Name of Paulie. Runs a towing yard like it's a monastery. Tithes to himself." She looked at Marisol when she said it, like the room had already decided her mouth would do the speaking that required truth. Marisol listened. She asked the questions that gathered what they needed without spilling what they were. The envelope gave up its contents to the table, a title to a bike that wasn't technically Darlene's, but felt like it belonged to her more than Paulie. A business card with a number that answered 3 out of 5 times. A photo of a boy with a good, tired face who had learned to be a man in counties that slap that lesson on you early. Ledger balanced accounts. He made 2 calls that went to voicemail and 1 that went to a man named Finch, who ran a hardware store and kept his ledger the way Ledger kept his. "You won't like the sheriff," he said, "but you won't have to hate him. He's slow, and slow can be dangerous." They split the work. 3 went to the towing yard to watch who came and who left with what. 2 visited the boy's job and stood near the door like good luck. Marisol and Ledger drove to the courthouse to find out which windows had ears. In the hallway, they crossed paths with a man in a suit that cost more than the motel's weekly rate. He had the kind of face that believed its own story, and a ring that loved itself too much to come off. He smiled like a judge holds a gavel, and saw the patches and made a calculation he thought was clever. "You folks visiting our little town?" he asked. "Driving through," Ledger said, "because you don't owe truth to people who would waste it."
Keep driving, the man said pleasantly. We do just fine without tourists. Then you won't mind if we don't stop, Marisol answered, and learned from his eyes that he liked a woman better when she kept her head bent and her voice smaller. They were back on their bikes when Ledger said, "We'll do this clean." "We always do," Marisol said, "even when it gets dirty." At the towing yard, the gate wore a lock that looked difficult until you touched it. The chain remembered a favor and fell without complaint. Inside, the rows of dead cars watched with eye holes where parts had been sold. The office smelled like coffee from Thursday and a man who believed his sweat was a victory. Paulie came in late with a sandwich like he loved himself and a walk like the driveway was a red carpet. He stopped when he saw Ledger and then stepped forward because he liked to confuse courage with impulse. "You lost?" he asked. "Found," Ledger said. "We're here to square something." Paulie laughed. It was a small sound, that a fact. He looked at Marisol then, let his eyes do the thing men like him think is a trick. He didn't look long. He had sense enough to know when Glass did not like being stared at. It was a dance and they both knew the steps. Talk, threaten, bargain, pretend the law is a partner. But Ledger changed the song by placing the envelope on the counter and saying, "You know this kid." He tapped the photo. "You know what you did." Words pulled the air tight. Paulie looked at the picture, looked at Ledger, looked at the door where two of theirs stood like door frames. "He took what wasn't his," Paulie said. "I took what was mine." Marisol's voice was quiet when she said, "You took what wasn't yours twice. Debt ain't theft. Extortion is." Paulie tried the smile that had worked at least 80 times in his life. Big words. "Small town," Ledger said. "They echo."
It didn't go loud. Those stories are cheap. It went steady. A call, a new number, a man in a cruiser who had not expected to be honest this morning and discovered he liked the taste of it. A mechanic with a ledger of his own, and a wife who said she would sleep better if she didn't have to look at that boy's mother in the grocery aisle and pretend nothing could be done. Paulie's ring tapped the counter twice as if asking for old magic, and when none came, he sighed and used a pen that hadn't signed a good thing in months. When they rolled out, the boy's title sat on the passenger seat of a small sedan that had passed inspection by the skin of its patience. Darlene cried in a way that respected the world for being able to make things right on a Tuesday. Ledger wrote a number for her on the motel notepad and underlined it twice. "If anyone comes asking for what's no longer theirs," he said, "you call." The club's business concluded itself the way a rainstorm concludes without method, suddenly, and with a rainbow only children notice. They stood smoking under an eave that wasn't built for them and didn't complain about it. Plans were made, rides too. Someone said eggs, and everyone listened like a prayer. Red Bluff sat 15 miles south like a bruise that begged for being pressed. Ledger looked at Marisol, and she didn't have to say anything, because some mornings the line between what you should do and what you must do gets so thin it sings. He nodded. "We'll be polite," he said. They rolled in as a chorus. Engines low, heads high. The diner bell's scream this time sounded like a greeting. The countermen flinched, then were ashamed of themselves and hid the shame in their coffee. The boy in the baseball jacket smiled, and it landed on Marisol's chest like a patch of its own. Lynn's hands flew to her mouth. "Lord," she said into her palms, then into the room with courage she'd found in her apron pocket. "Gentlemen, ladies, we do eggs here." The tall one and his boys were already at a booth like they always had been. Their confidence rode up on them like a pair of pants a size too small. When they saw the patches, they looked first at the skulls and then at the eyes wearing them, and discovered those were what required decisions. Ledger approached the counter and set exact change for 6 coffees beside the register, as if money could do some of the talking. "Morning," he said. "We're here to eat." "You ain't here to stay," the tall one said too loud, falling back on the only trick he trusted. His gun was not visible. Maybe the morning had taught it manners. Ledger turned like a door on well-oiled hinges and regarded the man as if considering a weather report. "We came to eat. Then we came to leave. That's all." "Not all," the tall one said and stood. Marisol watched the way his friends didn't quite stand with him. She watched hands that wanted to make fists and made napkin crumples instead. Bodies know things that hearts can't admit in public. The room gathered itself around the decision it could feel approaching like a storm smell. Lynn put plates on the pass with a little too much force. The cook, a man the shape of a refrigerator that had seen hurricanes, stepped into view with a spatula like a scepter. "Food's getting cold, boys," he said. "Even hate tastes worse when it ain't hot." It got quiet. It always does right before the part no one can take back. Ledger took 2 steps toward the tall one, and the men in the room remembered the medieval days when steps like that had meanings. He kept his hands open and visible, and his voice so calm it took the edges off knives. He said, "You can sit and eat and be men who remember how to be from here. Or you can stand and be boys who make this place smaller than it needs to be. You pick. We'll eat either way." The tall one opened his mouth to make the mistake he'd been nursing since dawn. Outside, engines, more than theirs, rose on the road like a tide coming in hot. Someone yelled from the doorway, a voice with a badge in it and a life that had taught it little about choosing sides and much about sweeping up afterwards. "Hands where I can see 'em, now." A red dot bloomed against the chest of the man who had not been born knowing how to stop. Marisol felt her breath stop halfway to her lungs as the room turned to the light flashing through the diner glass and the decision that would teach them all who they were about to become.
Landed like thunder in bright daylight. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. Deputy cruisers angled into the curb with the kind of authority that makes gravel remember storms. Blue and red washed the diner's chrome trim in fast, nervous stripes. Sheriff Harlan himself stepped out first. Big man, quiet stride, hat brim that had learned the width of summers. The red dot on the tall man's chest wasn't from a fantasy rifle. It shivered from a deputy's taser, a reminder that even small towns owned tools that could humiliate pride in front of breakfast. "Hands," Harlan said, voice flat as a gravel road. "Every last one of you, up." The tall man lifted his palms like he'd been caught shoplifting at church. His boys followed, out of sync but obedient to the math of lasers. Inside, Lynn's hands were already high, one still stained with coffee where it had sloshed over her knuckles when sirens cut the air. Ledger's hands rose half a second after Marisol's, both with the slow grace of people who know the difference between power and noise. Harlan's eyes did clockwork, patch, gun bulge, fear smell, the way the boy in the baseball jacket trembled and still tried to seem like he wasn't. He had 30 years of that math under the brim. "Weapon," he said, nodding at the tall man's waist. "Set it on the sidewalk with 2 fingers, real gentle." The tall man's bravado tried to find footing and slipped in front of witnesses. The gun came out by the mouth of 2 fingers and kissed the concrete with less drama than it had promised an hour earlier. "Good," Harlan said. He nodded to a deputy. "Tag it." The deputy bagged the polymer like rotten fruit. Ledger didn't smile. Marisol didn't either. This wasn't victory. This was what happened when a morning failed a test and asked for makeup work. "Sheriff," Lynn called from behind the glass, the bell still shivering above her. "They told her to leave. They told me to make her leave. Not in my place." Harlan's jaw worked like a hinge in need of oil. He'd played softball with Lynn's ex when the man was still half kind and half whiskey. He closed his eyes into a squint that had seen too many batters. "Everybody's got a right to eat," he said. Into the air, into the record, into whatever God measured small-town courage. He turned to the tall man. Name. He spat his syllables like he thought they could be weapons. Tyler Voss. Voss, Harlan repeated, tasting the V, the way it has to be earned. You're under arrest. Brandishing. Disturbing the peace. Might add trespass if you'd like to argue on my sidewalk. He nodded. A deputy moved, cuffs came out, the click loud enough to find every listening ear. I didn't... Voss started, but his own boys had already stepped 2 inches away from him, as if pride could stain boots. Harlan's gaze slid over the Outlaws' MC and landed on Ledger's face. Ledger gave the sheriff a nod that meant both I won't make your job harder and I'll make sure you don't forget mine. Harlan had dealt with enough clubs to know what that meant, a courtesy, not surrender. Y'all here to eat? He asked, and the question was both ridiculous and precisely useful. Yes, sir, Ledger said. Paying customers. We don't loiter. Harlan's cheek twitched at sir. He didn't need the courtesy, but he respected grammar when it could carry a morning safely to noon. Then go on in. Let's see if this place can do what it says on that sign. Voss laughed as they walked past him. It was a smaller laugh than earlier, a sound with parts missing. You think this is over, he said, half to Ledger, half to Marisol. Sundown makes men honest. Marisol didn't look at him. She looked at Lynn. We'll take eggs, she said. However the kitchen forgives us. The bell announced them like a wedding nobody planned. Inside, the room exhaled the air it had been hoarding. The cook slapped bacon on the flat top like he was baptizing it back into kindness. Ledger took a booth that faced both door and window, the way old instincts ask. Marisol slid in next to him. The club fanned out in 2s and 1s, a flock that knew exactly how to be birds.
Harlan lingered at the door, hat in his hand now, eyes doing the quiet work of making a statement no one would engrave anywhere official. Everybody eats, even the ones you don't think should, especially them. He left with a nod to Lynn that contained 20 years of small-town transactions. You call me, I'll come. Don't make me regret it. I won't make you regret it. Plates hit the table with the ceremony of communion. Eggs, toast, meat that had died for a more complicated cause. Ledger bowed his head half an inch, and the table did too, not out of piety, but out of gratitude for heat you choose. When they lifted their eyes, the world had a slightly better chance. You all right? Lynn asked, in a voice that sounded like someone checking a tire before a long drive. I'm here, Marisol said. That's most of it. The boy in the baseball jacket stood, dragged his chair a little too loudly, started to speak, then swallowed and took a step anyway. Ma'am? He asked Marisol, eyes shaking but mouth determined. Is your bike a Thunder Chief? Marisol smiled because she couldn't help it. Close, she said. Custom, but the bones are that. He nodded as if he were confirming something old and vital. It sounds like my granddad's truck, but good. He flushed with his own courage, and the room gave him a small applause made of silence. Ledger ate like a man who understood he also had to be thinking. Between bites, he said, We got business north still, but we'll be back through by dusk. He looked at Lynn. You want company then? Lynn's eyes did math in the corner of their sockets. She was weighing a quiet night against a loud one that ended well. I want eggs to be eggs. But if the world has other plans, I'll take witnesses who don't scare when wind knocks the sign. We don't scare easy, Ledger said. We don't scare at all, one of the younger writers muttered, before Ledger's glance explained the difference between bragging and truth. They ate, they tipped, and they left with the bell blessing them with a clean tone this time.
Outside, Harlan had already driven away with Voss in the back seat, and the sidewalk had resumed its ancient job of supporting steps that didn't trust themselves. The pickup with the curling sticker was gone. In its place, a paper coffee cup rested against the curb like a tiny memorial to bad mornings. "Church is in 40, Ledger said, over the idle rumble of 10 bikes agreeing to be one thing for a few hours. Marisol nodded, eyes on the diner window where Lynn, reflexively, reached to straighten the crooked sugar caddy, and then, catching herself, let it be. The boy in the baseball jacket had pulled out a notebook and was drawing something that looked like a road. The ride to church felt like rinsing. The sky had decided to shed its bruise and go to work. The highway unfurled, and the county lines they crossed shrugged like shoulders when good news is late but not impossible. In a rented room behind a feed store, they sat at folding tables whose legs clicked into place like rules. 12 men, 3 women, a stack of minutes from the last vote. Ledger knocked twice on the cheap wood to open and once to close, ritual that could hold when other things couldn't. Business came and passed. A brother down in Amarillo who needed gas money after a radiator died like a horse. A sister in Missoula facing a judge who didn't like her tattoos and the people they meant. A plea to buy a gravestone for a rider whose people had run out of breath and cash on the same day. Votes were taken, hands raised. The math of family was done out loud, as it should be. Then Ledger said, "Red Bluff." And the room changed its posture. He told it plain. Voss, the gun, the sheriff who could still meet a morning halfway, the diner with the rule, the message sent, sundown makes men honest. Silence afterwards, the kind that measures itself like a tape. An old man named Bullet, skin like hickory and eyes that had read every line a road could write, spoke first. Sundown makes cowards honest about their fear. That's all it does. A younger writer, with knuckles like bottle caps, said, "We could set up at the diner, make a line, let 'em try." A woman named Strega, patches older than some men's beards, shook her head. "We ain't a wall, we're a door. People need to see through us to what comes next, not crash into us and pretend that's the whole world." Ledger let the talk ripen. That was his gift. He knew when to let silence be part of the conversation. Finally, he looked at Marisol. "You started the morning," he said. "You close it. What do you want?" She thought of Lynn's hands flat on laminate. She thought of the boy practicing bravery with a fork. She thought of Voss's face when he realized guns don't raise men, only stakes. "I want quiet," she said, "but quiet earned." She breathed. "We go back, we eat again, we bring friends who don't wear patches but know how to stand. We talk to Harlan, he'll grumble but he'll come. We give the room more eyes than excuses." Bullet nodded. "Witnesses," he said. "That's how you teach a town to grow up without making it bleed." Ledger tapped the table twice in approval. "So ordered," he said, and the words didn't smile, but they were glad. They broke. They rode. Between errands, Marisol sent messages in the quiet way clubs prefer. A teacher in town who owed her a favor for a ride given in a rainstorm. A pastor whose nephew had once wrenched in an outlaw's garage when his uncle's sermon wasn't enough to keep him out of trouble. The handwear man Finch, who always arrived with nails and left with stories. She asked them for nothing heavy, only presents. "Bring yourself," she wrote. "Bring your good eyes." By 5, clouds had stacked in the west like folding chairs. Red Bluff's main street ran a ribbon of traffic that didn't know where to be. The neon had recovered its rhythm and sang open with a little more heart. Inside, Lynn had prepped extra coffee and set out pies she hadn't planned to serve today. The boy in the baseball jacket had changed into a clean tee and combed his hair, which made him look like his own cousin. The bell rang for the first arrivals. 2 teachers, a plumber, Finch from the hardware store with his apron still on. They took stools without being told and ordered pie as if calories could reinforce courage.
The pastor came next, collar tucked into his pocket, because he knew sometimes cloth scared men more than truth. A rancher sat, hat in hand, thumb rubbing the sweatband as if that could polish the moment. Then pipes, a dozen, measured, low, rolled in like far thunder that wins you a harvest. Ledger led them to the far side, where booths made it easier to sit with your back against something that had been cleaned with lemon for 30 years. Marisol took the seat that looked both at the door and at Lynn's face. Harlan came on foot, which mattered. He left the cruiser a block away and walked his authority down the sidewalk like he trusted his legs more than his lights. He entered with no hat, hair flattened by the day. He nodded to the room with the dignity of a man who knew dignity had to be given more often than it could be demanded. "Evening," he said. "Eat something or I'll write you all tickets for loitering." It landed as a joke and as a rule. Sunset took its job seriously and painted the window with oranges you couldn't stay mad in. For a heartbeat, it looked like this might go down as an ordinary Tuesday that had tried to hurt people and failed. Even the cook started to tell a story about the time a raccoon outsmarted him and won the pie. And laughter did what it does best: remind a room what else it can be. The bell rang. Tyler Voss had made bail. He didn't come alone. 6 with him this time. Faces from the morning and a few new ones who had dressed for a parade held in a mirror. No weapons visible, which meant they remembered something from handcuffs. But their walk said they had replaced metal with meanness sharpened on each other's pride. They didn't speak right away. That was new. They looked. Voss's eyes did a lazy lap of the room, lingered on patches, paused on Harlan's hat on the counter, rested on Lynn's apron, and finally found Marisol as if he had been pretending he could avoid it. "Evening," he said with a parody of courtesy so nearly accurate it caused an ache. "We came for dinner." "Then you came to the right place," Lynn said, voice steady. "Sit where you like. Menus are clean." Voss looked at the empty booth near the window and sat slowly, claiming it like he thought furniture made him king. His people took the seats around him. One, a scarecrow of a man with a neck tattoo that tried and failed to grow up into an idea, stared too long at the Outlaws until Ledger's eyes closed the window politely. Harlan stood. He didn't put his hand on his belt. He didn't raise his voice. "Ground rules," he said simply. "You know them. You break them, you ride with me. That's the whole story." Voss shrugged an entire religion of contempt in one shoulder. "I'm hungry, not stupid."
The cook delivered their waters like they were court summonses. Lynn approached with a pad she didn't need. "What can I get you?" she asked. "What's the special?" Voss said, eyes on Marisol as if menus were small jokes. "Chili," Lynn said. "Been simmering since 3. "Give me 2 bowls," Voss said. "Man can work up an appetite getting out of jail." No one laughed. The room's oxygen turned into something else for a second, then turned back into air when the bell on the kitchen pass dinged and the cook shouted, "Order up," like a hymn. It went this way for 10 minutes. Eating, not eating, watching, not watching, choosing not to be the story when being the story would be so easy. Voss's friends tried to be funny with the waitress and got looks that took the sugar out of their tea. The pastor paid for a plumber's coffee without being seen. Finch brought a jar of pickled okra from behind the counter and set it near Harlan's elbow, the way friends in small towns admit love. Then Voss stood, holding his glass like a microphone. "Speech," he said. "No," Harlan said before the word had finished committing its own crime. "We ain't church. Sit." Voss smiled with his mouth and not at all with his eyes. "Well, you're right. We ain't church. We're a town, and towns decide who belongs." Ledger didn't move. Marisol didn't either. The teachers didn't. The boy in the baseball tee held perfectly still like a deer that had learned something about rockets. Voss raised his glass a half-inch toward Marisol. "This ain't Mexico," he said. The room emptied of sound. Marisol stood as if standing were a sacrament, and you only did it when you had something to offer to the altar. She didn't look at Harlan because this wasn't his.
She didn't look at Ledger because she wasn't asking permission. She looked at Lynn, at the boy, at Finch, at the pastor with the collar in his pocket. Then she looked at Voss. This is Red Bluff, which is smaller than Mexico and bigger than you. You get to choose which part of it you live in. Voss laughed. You go and teach me geography? Better, she said. Manners. He stepped toward her. Every step a thesis about how men learn to be men when their teachers are other boys. His shoulder brushed a chair. The boy flinched. Harlan's hand hovered 2 inches above his belt. Ledger's forearms tensed because even patience has nerves. A door opened that no one had seen. The old man with the milk crate from that morning walked in carrying the same crate, this time full of bread that smelled like an apology that had taken all day to bake. He saw the room, measured it like a carpenter who had found a rot under paint, and walked to an empty space between Voss and Marisol. Brought what I promised. 2 sourdough, 1 rye, 1 cinnamon, because I needed to feel like the day did more than chew gristle. He set them down, wiped his hands on his jacket, and only then looked at Voss. You paying customers? We're talking, Voss said, blinking at the interruption. Talking's cheaper than bread, the old man said. Eat or go. It broke the spell enough for the cook to whistle an obscene riff and for the room to remember its spine. Voss's mouth tightened. He looked at Harlan and weighed something in the scale of his neck muscles. He looked at Marisol and lost count. Fine. We'll eat, we'll pay, we'll go. He sat. He turned his spoon in the chili and discovered, to his annoyance, that it tasted like a thing he would have liked if he were allowed to. They finished without another word. They paid, poorly, and left with a bell that rang more like relief than victory. The door closed. The room breathed. Harlan's shoulders came down an inch. The pastor retrieved his collar and put it back on like a promise. The boy let out a laugh that had helium in it. It should have ended there. It almost did. Marisol hit the sidewalk into a sky that had regrets about making dusk so brief. Ledger came behind her, then Strega, then Bullet, then a handful of men who smelled like oil and old blessings. Harlan paused at the register to hand Lynn back the jar of okra with 2 bills tucked under the lid. For the window you'll end up having to fix, he said dryly, trying to rob the future of its surprise.
The future didn't like being robbed. It roared from up the street on 4 wheels and a bad idea. Headlights pinned the sidewalk like guilt. The pickup with the curling sticker had returned with a friend. Another truck, darker, suspension raised beyond reason, tires that liked to pretend pavement was war. They slid to a stop half a block out and idled with a noise that wanted a medal. Back inside, Harlan barked, not because he believed in running, but because he believed in distances. Ledger shook his head once. We'll hold the porch, he said. You hold the law. The truck's doors opened in a staggered rhythm that made the hair on Marisol's arms raise. 4 men, 1 woman with her chin up like she had graduated from a different school than the others. Voss wasn't among them. Cowards delegate. The woman lifted a phone. Live, she said. Say hi, y'all. Streams, witnesses of another kind. Marisol felt something cold in her stomach, and then something warm over it. Resolve. You don't let lies own the record. She stepped forward into the camera's wide-open eye. This is a diner, she said. Everybody eats. Except you, one of the men said, grin yanking his lip. He reached into the truck bed and pulled out a sign. Plywood, white paint, hand letters dabbed by a brush held too tightly. White only. It was not clever. It was not even new. It was an artifact dug out of a grave and paraded like a trophy by men who did not understand ghosts eat the ones who feed them. Harlan moved. Put the sign down, he said, a warning and a prayer. Last I checked, cardboard's legal, he grinned, just like opinions. Your spelling's legal too, Finch called from inside, and the room laughed with a life that punched holes in the dark. The woman's phone panned. "We got ourselves a standoff," she sang. "Good people of the internet, you watchin'?" Hearts scrolled. Comments sparked like trash fires. The stream could make this anything. That was the danger. That was the gift. Marisol unzipped her jacket. She didn't hold the patch up this time. She didn't need to. She put it on. The cloth lay against her like skin that had always been there and had been waiting for her to recognize it. She fastened the snaps with movements the camera could see and that the room already understood in its bones. The men hesitated. Even streams know ceremony when they see it. "This is my town," Marisol said quietly. "I'm in it now." The woman lowered her phone half an inch. "You think that scares us?" "No," Marisol said, and smiled, the small private smile her father had used when a carburetor finally seated right. "I think it ends the guessing." The trucks revved, impatience on four wheels. The sign went up, a clumsy flag. The boy inside the diner pressed his face against the glass and learned more in that minute than he would in a semester. Harlan looked tired the way fathers look tired when love has to be stern. "You're on record," he said to the camera. "Put the sign down, walk away, or I'll make this a night you don't forget in the way you don't want to remember." "Do it," the woman whispered to her own man, as if she could edit her life in post. He lifted the sign higher and took a step. Ledger took one too. Then Bullet, then Strega, old and unshakable, eyes like a weather report that says, "Bring a coat but do not panic." The sidewalk had only so much room for bad ideas. A stone cracked through the night like a starter pistol and spidered the diner's front window into a map of places you refused to live in. The boy inside yelped. Lynn's hand flew to her mouth and then to the counter where she found the baseball bat she kept for rats and regrets. Harlan drew. The sound of a sidearm leaving leather can be obscenely intimate in a small town. "Enough," he said, and in that one syllable 30 years of choosing which fights to walk into came due. The woman, the streamer, froze. The camera trembled, caught the red-blue of lights far and near, the glitter of a broken window, the skull on Marisol's back, the sign lifted like a wound you decide to keep. Marisol stepped forward between the sign and the glass, not because she wanted to block the camera, but because she wanted to give the town a different shape to remember in the morning. She opened her hands. "Don't," she said, and the word carried her mother's kitchen, her father's patient wrench, the long miles where you decide who you will be at the next gas station. "Why?" he sneered. "Because you said?" He stepped again. That made two. "You're about to get arrested," Harlan said, voice soft, "and you know it. Maybe I want to be famous." And the woman's phone leaned closer like a vulture. Ledger spoke for the first time, words heavy as socket wrenches. "You're about to be remembered by your children. Decide which version they'll have." It landed. It always does with some men. You can see the pause, the way a father's face swims up behind their eyes and asks for a different story. The hand holding the sign trembled. A bottle arced from the second truck, a lazy parabola of cowardice, and smashed in the street, fire-licking gasoline into a small, meaningless exhibition that hissed out when it met rainwater still crouched in the gutter from dawn. The moment that could have turned into history turned into a mess instead. No fire, just the smell of almost. Sirens again. Backup. Deputies who had been watching, waiting for Harlan's hand to lower. Not to fire, to point. He pointed. That one, the bottle thrower. And two deputies took him quick and unremarkably to the hood of a car where a small amount of reasoning happened out loud with handcuffs.
The man with the sign watched his friend cuffed. He watched the camera watching him. He watched the boy inside the diner holding his breath like he was underwater and wanted to see what air felt like tomorrow. He lowered the sign without drama, like a man placing a tray of dishes he had no business carrying in the first place. The streamer hissed air through her teeth, angry at anticlimax. But the stream had caught something better than blood. It had caught a choice. "You're all on record," Harlan said, putting the steel gray back in his holster. "That means next time I don't have to ask. I'll just come get you." "Next time?" the woman yelped. "You think we're coming back?" "I think habit is a hard country to leave," Harlan said. "But I'm here when you try." Marisol bent, picked up the plywood. She considered snapping it over her knee for the camera and then gave the stream something else instead. She tucked the sign under her arm, carried it to the dumpster, and slid it in with the care you give something fragile and wrong. When she came back, she had only the smell of old coffee grounds and no slogans. The trucks left because there was nowhere for them to go that wouldn't be smaller than staying. The stream ended with a sour little mule of outrage at boredom. The deputies lingered for paperwork's sake. Harlan wrote a thing he hadn't written in months and signed it like a man who had finally earned his supper. Inside, Lynn's window held together long enough for tape. Finch fetched a pane from the back of his truck like a magician producing a rabbit. The cook swept quietly and cussed the broom until it did better. The boy sat with a slice of cinnamon bread and the face of someone who had dodged something and knew it. "It's never just over," Ledger said, leaning on the counter, eyes on the street, ears on the room. "No," Harlan said, "but night's end, that helps." Marisol sat at the booth nearest the window and felt the day finally press its palms against her back blades. The patch on her back felt heavier and lighter at once, like armor that breathes. Lynn brought her a coffee without asking. It tasted like forgiveness with a little soap from a hurried mug. "Thank you," Lynn said, throat tight. Marisol shook her head. "You held the rule," she said. "We just made sure the rule held you." The pastor stood and cleared his throat the way men do when they plan to say something that could embarrass them. "There's a potluck Sunday in the park. No sermon, just food. Bring whatever you call home. If folks show up with more than they need, we'll call that a blessing. If they come up short, we'll call that a chance." He glanced at Harlan, who stared in approval that was easier than words. Ledger checked his phone and grimaced. "We got to roll," he said to the table. "Business that doesn't care about county lines." He nodded to Harlan, a warrior's courtesy. "Sheriff." Harlan nodded back, a farmer's vow. "We'll keep your place at breakfast, if you're through." Strager pressed a folded 20 into the boy's palm without anyone seeing it, except everyone did and everyone agreed to pretend. Bullet fixed the door closer so it wouldn't slam, because nothing heals a place like little repairs that keep the future from getting jumpy. On the sidewalk, under the new glass, the evening had forgiven them enough stars to count by. Engines bloomed, warm as hearths. Marisol pulled her helmet on, then stopped when she saw the old man with the bread crate standing in the same shadow he'd used to retreat earlier that morning. "You bake every day?" she asked him. "Most. Days like this, for sure." He peered at her patch. "My brother rode with men wore that back when he could get you buried in the wrong county." "It still can," Marisol said softly. He nodded. "He wasn't very good at being alive, but he got real good at being dead. People remembered him well." He smiled, small. "Maybe try the other way." "I'm practicing," she said. They rolled, Ledger in front, Marisol two back, the line flexible and strong as rope. The night took them as if it had been expecting them. County road turned to highway, highway to memory. They delivered a part at the next town over for a bike that had been waiting, shook a man's hand whose gratitude smelled like oil and onions, and turned back to Red Bluff because sometimes you circle a thing to make sure it stays where you left it. Past midnight, the diner wore a bruise of tape on its window but glowed warmer than it had at noon. A handwritten sign and fresh marker leaned against the glass where plywood had wanted to be. "Everyone eats." The E's were slightly different sizes the way courage is when humans try to make it uniform. Lynn was wiping the counter like you do when you're too tired to go home and too wired to stay.
They didn't go in. They didn't need to. They idled a half-minute, engines talking among themselves like old men on a porch. You see that? Yeah, I did. We were there. Then they rolled on, leaving warmth they hadn't chosen, but had tended. Near dawn, the sky unfastened itself and slid into pink. Marisol pulled off at the river turnout and let the quiet sit with her. Santa Muerte ticked in the cool like a cat settling after a long argument with the night. Ledger walked up beside her and didn't speak because you don't talk over a sunrise unless you're a fool. Good day's work, he said eventually. Messy, she said. Most good things are, he said. She thought about Voss and his boys and the version of themselves they had almost engraved in history. She thought about the woman's stream, how it had wanted blood and got choice instead. She thought about how thin the difference sometimes is between a town and a headline. What happens now? She asked. Ledger shrugged. We ride, he said. We fix what we can. We don't break what ain't ours. We come when called. He looked at her, at the way the patch sat on her like the last puzzle piece sliding into its good shape. You stand with us the next few counties? She smiled. Until the road tells me different. He laughed. Road's got a soft spot for you. It'll be nice for a while. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number, likely a teacher's friend or a cousin's cousin, likely someone who'd seen the stream and wanted to say either thank you or worse. She let it buzz. The river spoke in its patient rope voice. Birds that didn't know they were beautiful auditioned for a day that hadn't decided yet. When she finally looked, it was from Lynn. A photo. The boy in the baseball tee behind the counter, holding a rag, wiping the glass with care that stated, I belong here. On the window, in neat block letters, the sign, Everyone Eats. Below the photo, 4 words. Come back for breakfast. Marisol sent one word back. Soon. They moved out when the sun set its first foot on the county. Crooked Pine awoke on their right, confused but game. A coyote trotted along a fence line the way old poets spell their names. At the line where the asphalt changed color, Ledger lifted 2 fingers from the grip, and the whole column answered the same way. I see you. We're us. Keep going. Morning at the diner was not special. It was better. No trucks paraded any flags. No signs announced sins. A man in a suit from the courthouse ate with a construction worker, both arguing about football and the price of nails. Marisol laughed at something the cook said that wasn't that funny but needed a laugh anyway. Harlan brought his daughter, tall, quiet, eyes like ponds that had kept secrets, and let her pick the cinnamon roll and learn that joy isn't a bribe, it's a seed. Marisol sat in a corner booth where you can see the parking lot without looking like you're trying. The boy brought her coffee without asking how she took it, which is the sort of respect that makes towns bloom. Finch slid in opposite and placed a small wrapped package on the formica like Christmas had been rescheduled for reasonable people. For the road, he said. Nails that don't bend when they shouldn't. Ledger joined with the morning paper he did not intend to read because the news did not include what mattered most. Strega stole half his toast and dared him to object. Bullitt told a story about a bridge in Alabama no one could cross before a man named Jonah built a ramp and jumped it and landed halfway in love with the woman watching from the other side. The bell rang and the town kept being a town. That's how you win. When it was time to go, and it is always time to go, even when you want to stay, they paid and stood and adjusted gloves and zippers the way ritual insists. Marisol hugged Marisol without warning and then apologized for touching a saint. Sorry, she said, wiping her eyes with the heel of her hand. Don't be. We're not statues. On the sidewalk, the boy hesitated and then squared his shoulders and said, Ma'am, I'm saving for a bike. My mom says I gotta get a job and keep grades and not be stupid. Do you have advice? She thought of all the wrong answers that felt right, and the one right answer that sounded plain. Be where you say you'll be. Do what you say you'll do. Don't let machines make you lazy about listening, and don't ride angry. Roads hold grudges. He nodded like she had handed him a key. In a way, she had. Santa Muerte caught the light and threw it back with grace. Ledger leaned in. You're sure? He asked quietly. He meant 100 things. The patch, the road, the kid, the town. Yes, she said, until the road tells me different. They rode out, not triumphant, because triumph is a drum solo and this was a bass line. They rode like a promise carried forward. When called, we come. When fear shouts, we speak. When hate eats, we bring something better to the table and insist on manners. At the county line, Marisol slowed, lifted her chin at the sky and laughed once because being alive was better than being remembered well, and she had been offered both and taken one. Ahead, the highway stitched the horizon to the day. Behind, a diner held heat, like a heart. In the evening, miles away, a storm muscled up and then decided to be rain instead of ruin. Marisol counted lightning 4 beats after the flash and named each count a person she knew now because of this day. Lynn, the boy, Harlan, Finch, the streamer whose video shone the internet a town choosing its better face. Tyler Voss, who would be back from somewhere as some version of himself and would bring with him the same question towns have always had to answer. Who are you when you aren't watched? She didn't fear the question. She had lived the answer. When the dark finally tugged the zipper up the sky, they found a wayside with a picnic bench where tired maps go to sit. They ate gas station sandwiches like they were miracles, because sometimes they are. Ledger told an old joke badly and everyone laughed right. Marisol's phone vibrated, a new message. From an unknown number. A single photo. A hand-painted sign on a church lawn, block letters borrowed from a diner window. Everyone eats. Beneath it, smaller. Everyone belongs. Her throat got tight in that good, mean way that says you saved something you didn't know had been drowning. She typed a reply and deleted it. Some answers belong only to the road. She slipped the phone back and let the night be large around her without being scary. She leaned her back against Santa Muerte's warm tank and closed her eyes. Tomorrow would bring more miles, other names, different bell chimes. It would bring small cruelties and large grace. It would bring someone in need dialing a number they didn't remember giving to anyone and hearing from far away and very close a voice say, "On my way." It would bring Marisol Quintero, who knew how to wear silence and how to fill it, who had learned the weight of a patch and the mercy of a pause, who would put a sign in a dumpster and a better one on a window. It would bring breakfast. Eggs, if they were lucky. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.